Greetings and welcome to this edition of
Positronic. Hypersonic.
I'm Barry P. Cook. I'm just here to talk a little bit about the movie Peter Pan and Wendy, which I already did a quick review of, and which I find myself coming back to talk about because of a video by the Critical Drinker who didn't like this movie. In fact, he called it awful and a lot of other negative things, and I just felt that I had to respond, not only because I don't think that it's awful, and because I, in fact, think that it wasn't awful, but because he had a lot of things to say about it specifically, which, in his opinion, made it awful, that I don't really think are even necessarily there, and which I also don't think make it awful if they are there. So let me tell you what he had to say about it in his video, and I'll put a link to the video in my description so you can see it. But what it boils down to is, it's not a shot for shot remake of the original Disney animated film. That's basically his criticism. Because all he does through his whole video is compare it to that and say how that was great and this one sucks. It's almost like he doesn't know that nobody does shot for shot remakes of movies. I mean, there was one that I'm aware of in recent history, which was Psycho with Vince Vaughn. It's not something that's done. Every time a classic story, either from a book or a film or comic books, gets a new adaptation, it's going to be slightly different from the previous ones. It's not going to be a shot for shot remake or a line for line remake. Nobody does that. I mean, some come close in terms of line for line, or plot point for plot point, but nobody's remaking original properties exactly. It's just not something that's done. So you're going to get something that varies from that or departs from that to one degree or another. Now, this happens to depart from it in a lot of ways, but that by itself doesn't make it awful. Let me get into some of his specific criticisms. He talks about the fact that there's a lot of diversity in the movie because Tinkerbell is black and Peter Pan is not white, and there's black children and possibly an Asian child, I'm not sure, among the Lost Boys, and there are girls among the Lost Boys, and this really bothers him. Now, I don't know why they put girls in the Lost Boys other than for diversity's sake, but okay, it was for diversity's sake, to have boys and girls and not to exclude girls from this group of children in Neverland, even though they're called the Lost Boys. Okay, so what? How does that make it bad? It doesn't. It just makes it less likable for people who don't want things to ever change and who want modern adaptations of older stories to be exactly the same as previous ones. It's just stupid. And the Lost Boys, as a group of people in this adaptation, are background characters. They're not as front and center as they might be in other adaptations. So in the end, who cares what their race is? In fact, even if they were front and center, who cares? Why can't the Lost Boys just be diverse? Why? Why does it have to be the case that Peter Pan only took white kids to Neverland? Why? Why can't Tinkerbell be black? Why does he say, Critical Drinker, that the male lead in this film playing Peter Pan is pretending to be Peter Pan? That's what he says. Meaning that because he's a person of color, he can't be Peter Pan because Peter Pan's white. Why does Peter Pan have to be Lily White? I made a video about this movie before it came out where I talked about the backlash against the casting of people of color in it. So forgive me if I reiterate some of those points, but I don't understand why people object to that, because my thinking is, why should people of color be denied role after role after role in new adaptation project after new adaptation project after new adaptation project of an old classic or whatever in 2023, just because racism kept them out of these white writers' stories, if for no other reason than because the mostly white public or consumers wouldn't have given their money to read or see projects with people of color in them. When these stories were first written, why should people of color be locked out of every other project that's made, whether it's an adaptation of a DC comic book from old times, a Marvel comic book from old times, something like Peter Pan? Why? Why should the racism that kept them out of those projects when they first were created keep them out of them again? Because some people don't want to see black people on screen? Like, what? I don't understand it. He accuses the film more than once of being full of modern politics. It isn't. There is zero modern politics in the story. Zero. The casting might have had some modern political consciousness elements to it, but so what? No one in the story mentions anything about race issues or gender issues. There's one thing briefly where Wendy says, "Why are there girls in the Lost Boys?" And that's it. And they say, "Yeah, okay, we're girls in the Lost Boys." She goes, "Okay," and that's it. Nobody. There's no mention of the politics of race or gender or anything in the story. So it's just inaccurate to accuse the film of containing modern politics. It doesn't. There's nothing about the story that's political, modern or otherwise. He takes issue in the video with the fact that Wendy is able to take on a bunch of pirates by herself without getting killed. And of course, this is a common thing that conservatives like the critical drinker always criticize because they don't like it when movies make females almost as good as men or as good as men or better than men at anything, especially things that they think women shouldn't be good at, like sword fighting. And, it doesn't bother me any. Why is that? Well, because tomboys exist. And, in the movie isn't set in 2023, obviously, but in 2023, women are in the military. So is the thinking that women were incapable of those things 100 years ago and are only capable of them now? Because that's ridiculous. Now, a teenager and a woman are not the same thing, but like she's on the cusp of adulthood. So what's the big deal? To the extent that it's a little bit unrealistic, I would have to ask him if he's aware that in this film, uh, fairies exist and children fly and a giant pirate ship flies. So, a girl can't be, a little bit unrealistically good at sword fighting, and that's where you draw the line. He also complains, oh, Peter Pan takes a long fall in the movie and doesn't die. The thinking being, obviously the character can't die. Why would they have him take that long fall? I don't know. Again, there are fairies in the movie, and people fly. So, why would you complain about that? It's just ridiculous. He complains at one point that Wendy slaps Peter in the film, and he says that she does it to assert dominance over him. Now, I don't know if he was serious about that, but that's not why she slaps him. She slaps him because his antics and things that he does in the movie almost get her and her brothers killed. And when she talks to him about it, he's very glib about it. Now, if someone did that to me, I might want to slap them. And if someone did it to him, he'd want to slap them too. So it's like, dude, shut up. Shut up. It seems that he's got it in his head, as I was saying before, that because this film is different from the original, and indeed that this Wendy is different from the original. He talks about how in the cartoon one, she's a stereotypical late 1800s demure girl who acts very ladylike, and this Wendy is not like that. Okay, she's not, but he's got it in his head that that makes it bad. It doesn't. This Wendy is caught between being a child and a woman, someone who engages in swordplay with her brothers, but who also mothers them a little bit in a scene that he himself brought up in his video where she's singing lullabies to them. So she's, different, but she also does some of the motherly things in this movie that the character is depicted as doing in the original. And, it's possible he made this video just to rabble rouse or, engage in a little hyperbole. But if I take him at his word that he didn't like this movie and that he had a problem with all of these things genuinely, I would have to say that something he's overlooking is that the characters in the original Peter Pan and a lot of the Disney classics, as well as other films of the day, are very one dimensional and stereotypical, of the time. So in this movie, which they made in the 21st century, in 2023, they decided to make the characters of Peter Wendy, as well as Captain Hook, multidimensional, as opposed to just one dimensional, one note caricatures of human beings. They gave them dimension and made them human rather than them being uh, like cartoon characters through the whole movie because they're not. People aren't anyway. The original Peter Pan is fine, but why would you complain that a modern adaptation made the characters more human and more real and less like the cartoons of the original? Why would that be a criticism? Why would you have a problem with that? I don't understand. They're just two different versions. The cartoon one is what it is. This one is what it is. The attributes of each one doesn't make either of them bad or better than the other or worse than the other. They're just different. As I said in the beginning, his chief complaint seems to be it's not a note for note remake of the original. Okay. That doesn't make it bad or awful. So you're just wrong, CD. Sorry. You're just wrong. But that's really it. There's nothing more to say. He's just wrong. I'm going to get out of here. I'll be back with more content soon. Until I return, I wish you peace and long life.